بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Let's continue with our weekly session on the topic of Zakat. So this is part 2 of Zakat. Now the topic we're going to address today, and yes, we are going through the topic of Zakat in a slower pace, but we're going to cover everything inshallah within this chapter so that it will equip you to understand and answer questions with regard to Zakat. Now what we want to talk about now is those whom Zakat is obligatory upon. First and foremost, we have Muslims and non-Muslims. So Zakat, without any shadow of a doubt, is mandatory upon Muslims, but it is not obligatory upon non-Muslims. Now this requires a little bit of a discussion onto why is that the case. So when it comes to a Muslim, as long as a person has reached puberty, as long as the person is sane, and as long as the person has a minimum amount of wealth, which is called the nisab, we'll talk about that, and a year has passed by on that wealth as well on certain things, then that Muslim is obliged to pay for zakat on that. But the non-Muslim is not obliged to pay zakat. So why is that the case? Because if you think about it, imagine a society, let's say for example where Islamic law was predominant, then in this case we will find that Muslims are paying zakat, and that zakat money, we briefly touched upon it last week, but we will go into it in more detail, the recipients of that zakat money, so the poor, the needy, and so on and so forth. So this wealth is collected from Muslims who have that nisab, and then is distributed back into society. So the society can consist of Muslims and consist of non-Muslims. So this begs the question that why did Islam make zakat mandatory upon Muslims and not upon non-Muslims, and can there be adjustments to this, or is this set in stone? So when we look at the concept of zakat, respected listeners, is from the pillars of Islam, and in order for a person to do any elements of worship, any acts of worship, in order for that act of worship to be accepted, it has to come first and foremost with the prerequisite of the Shahada of Islam. When the Prophet ﷺ, he sent Mu'adh bin Jabal to Yemen, he gave him some golden advice. And he said to him, when you're going to the people of Yemen, and you call the people, start by calling the people to the Tawheed, testify that there is no deity of worship except Allah Almighty. Once people understand that and they accept that, then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, then inform them that Allah has made the 5 daily prayers obligatory. So it moves on to the next element, which is the prayer. Then the third aspect, the Prophet ﷺ told Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu ta'ala anhu that once that's done, or alongside that is the obligation of giving the zakat. So zakat was only made mandatory on the people of Yemen once they had submitted to the shahadatain. So they submit themselves to al-Islam. Furthermore, we said that it's an act of worship, and acts of worship are only accepted from those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is just an opening into understanding zakat. Now, what about a person who was not a Muslim and then becomes a Muslim? Of course, this person now is obliged to pay the zakat, and they will pay from the moment that they became a Muslim. So the obligation starts on them as soon as they embrace Islam. So they will have to assess their assets, and they will have to calculate a year from that moment, and then they'll have to start paying the zakat. It's an interesting question. What if it's the other way around? What if it's somebody who was a Muslim and then they decided to leave Islam? According to Islamic law, under Islamic governance, that person is still obliged to pay zakat. That person is still obliged to pay zakat. Now, so Why is there a difference? Number one, this difference that the zakat is on Muslims and not on Muslims. Number one, that zakat is a social duty, a defined right of the needy and the destitute, and it's a financial tax that's been obligated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be taken from the wealthy in the nation and rendered to the poor. So this is the first element that we need to look at, which is a social aspect. The second aspect is the act of worship. That this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming down on the believers. So the disbelievers from two angles. So from the aspect of Iman, obviously that is not there. But from a social aspect, yes, they fit that criteria. So what do we do? Zakat has been mentioned in the Quran alongside the prayer, Aqimus Salat wa Atu az-Zakat. Those two come often, they come hand in hand. So one who is giving zakat is one who also gives in their performs their prayers. So one without the other. Good. So the common question then is the following: that if Muslims are paying the zakat and non-Muslims are not, and they're living in the same country or the same nation, slightly unfair. Now, in order to really understand zakat, we have to understand the whole Islamic system. The wisdom through zakat is only seen when we look at it as a whole. Now, zakat is paid by Muslims and non-Muslims don't pay, but yet they're living in the same country, they're benefiting from the services, they're benefiting from all the faculties and facilities and all those things that are made available to them. How do we understand this? We have to look at another aspect, and that is the topic of jizya. Now, jizya is the tax that non-Muslims pay who live in an Islamic environment. Now, when you look at this from this angle, now this particular tax, the jizya, is paid by non-Muslims, but Muslims don't pay the jizya. But from another angle, the Muslims, they pay zakat, and non-Muslims don't pay zakat, and they're both annual taxes. The jizya, on the other hand, if you were to compare the amounts, the jizya is far less than what the zakat is. So at the end of the year, or at the end of the day, when it comes to these two payments that are made by a Muslim or made by non-Muslim, they both make payments. And the payments made are done, the higher of the two payments is the payment of zakat. So, some people have asked, in today's society, where let's say we do have some element of, Islamic law, we pay our zakat. And there are non-Muslims as well. But no one pays jizya, right? No, I don't think there's a single non-Muslim around the world that pays jizya. It's pretty much redundant. No one pays it. But Muslims are still paying zakat. So some argue the case that in this kind of environment, are we allowed to take an additional tax which is of the same amount or level of the zakat value from non-Muslims? Is that something which is permissible? And this was a lengthy discussion amongst the scholars to see which of the two, what argument is correct. And we find that there are evidences where Umar ibn al-Khattab, he did take taxes from certain tribes, certain Christians or non-Muslim tribes. He did take from them taxes which were the equivalent or even more than the zakat in certain circumstances. So some may argue the case that we can take a tax or an amount of money from them as well. Nevertheless, that's neither here or there, but I just wanted you to understand the holistic approach to zakat and who is zakat upon and who is it not upon. Now, another very interesting question. So we've looked at that zakat is mandatory upon Muslims who are sane, who are mature, and is not upon non-Muslims. Now, move over to the second category. Another common question. What about zakat on children? Or on those who are insane, right? Those two, do they have to pay zakat? Now, why are we asking this? Because a child is not free to maneuver with their wealth, and somebody who's insane or not fully aware of their surroundings, and they also do they have to really pay a zakat as well? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Rufi' al-qalam," the pen has been lifted on three people, meaning three types of people are free from any responsibility. Allah is not going to ask them any questions because they're not fully there. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ said, it is children until they hit puberty. So children under the age of puberty, they are not going to be asked such questions. Number two is a person who is asleep until they wake up. So if somebody is asleep and they do something, they are not responsible for it. Number 3 is the person that is insane until they recover their sanity. Now these 3 people are overlooked. If any of these 3 people, for example, they don't have to fast, they don't have to pray, and likewise other things, they're not responsible. They don't have the Islamic burden upon them to fulfill certain tasks. But the question here is about the wealth of the children and the wealth of somebody who is insane. So let's say somebody inherited wealth, and he inherited a large amount of wealth, right? Let's say £50,000, £100,000, inherited large amounts of wealth. Then that person lost their mind. Something happened and they lost their mind. Now, does this person have to pay zakat? Does a person who's lost their mind, do they have to pay zakat? Likewise, a child. Let's say a child inherited large amounts of wealth. He's only 7 or 8 years old, but yet to his name he has, £100,000 or something along those lines. Now, clearly that is above the nisab. The minimum amount of wealth is clearly above that level. So what do we do now? Does the child pay? Does the person who's insane pay? So there is a difference of opinion amongst the schools of thought on this matter. We find that there are 2 opinions. Number 1 is that no, a child does not pay, nor does an insane person pay until the sane person regains consciousness, until the child becomes an adult. That's one perspective. But the stronger of the 2 is the latter opinion, which is that zakat is haqqul mal. That's why we say zakatul mal. It is the right of money, irrespective of the owner of the money, right? It's the right of money. That money belongs to somebody else. Now that's without consideration of the owner of the wealth. It doesn't matter whether you're male, female, young, old. It doesn't really matter. That money has fulfilled a certain nisab. You've got to a certain amount of money. You've gone over the threshold, and you've had it for a year as well. Now that wealth is qualified to be paid zakat upon, even though the person is not fully qualified. So the scholars, they differ, and the majority of them conclude that yes, the child as well as the person who's insane, they are obliged to pay the zakat. Now of course they are not going to pay it themselves, but the guardian, the person who is responsible for looking after this person or these people, he or she is responsible for working out how much zakat is to be paid, and he or she is responsible for paying that zakat. And it's also highly recommended that the person who's doing this keeps a firm record of what he or she is doing, as this will come back to him in the future. But yes, there is a zakat to be paid on the wealth out of the child, as well as the person that is insane. Now, we'll just have a quick discussion on the upcoming topic. Inshallah, we're going to have to stop soon, as soon as the prayer comes in. So today's lesson will be relatively short. Inshallah, we'll pick things up next week. We'll start a little bit earlier as well. So what about assets that are subject to zakat? What kind of things do we have to pay zakat on? So make a note of this. Number 1, in Surah 9, verse number 34, Allah tells us that we have to pay zakat on gold and silver. On gold and silver. And write down between brackets, that's talking about currency today. It's talking about money today. Why? Because gold and silver was the commodity at the time, what people used to trade in. Now it is still a commodity, but it's still something people may trade in. But we have currency, and currency qiyasan ala dhahab wal fidda. It is taken by analogy. So gold and silver, and in between brackets, currency. Number 2, crops and fruits. Okay, so crops and fruits, they also are to be paid zakat on. So anything that you've worked hard for, you harvest, then if it fills a certain amount, then there is a zakat to be paid on the day of harvest. Number 3 is earnings that are made from trade or other business ventures. So any kind of investment that you have, so you're trading items, you're selling clothes, you're selling books, whatever you're selling, if you fulfill the threshold, you have a certain amount, then you have to pay zakat on the trade, right? Not on the tools, not on the business, but on the profit, on the trade itself. So we'll talk about that in more detail. Furthermore, there is also a zakat on animals, so cattle. All right, we won't go into that one because that's not applicable and it's very tedious as well. So we won't go into too much depth in that one. And then finally, the last bit of zakat is about something that's been found beneath the ground. So let's say you discovered a pot of gold, you discovered an antique, you discovered something that's very valuable under the ground. Then there is a zakat to be paid on those antiques. Okay. Is zakat to be paid on those antiques. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran the word amwal. So we say zakatul mal. The word mal is used, right? And mal is anything, any kind of wealth, property, goods, possessions that are mentioned inside the Quran. All of these fall under the topic of mal. Anything of value would be considered to be mal. So zakat is to be given on that. Now the condition, one of the conditions when it comes to zakat, paying zakat, is that a person who is paying zakat on an item, let's say on a property, let's say on some wealth, let's say on a debt, anything that a person has that you're paying, that you are obliged to pay zakat on, your savings or whatever it is. In this case, one of the conditions, or the main condition when it comes to paying zakat, is that a person must have undivided and absolute right of ownership, right? So the item that they're paying zakat on is theirs 100%. Okay, the money that's in your bank is your money, right? The goods that you're trading in, they're your goods, right? The harvest that you trade in or that you're growing and so on and so forth, it's your harvest. So you pay zakat on something that is completely yours, not something that you are looking after or something that's in your responsibility or something that you're sharing. No, it's on the ownership. So you must own that particular item. Right. Likewise, if we look at the concept of al-waqf, right? So there are certain endowments. People may build a house or an orphanage or a center, dawah center, and so on and so forth, and they will say all of this wealth, this this building, whatever it is for the sake of Allah. So they say it's a waqf. Now this waqf, it doesn't really have an owner. It's to be used continuously for the sake of Allah Almighty. These items are not to be paid zakat upon. If there is a building or a charity or something that has private ownership, so somebody actually owns it, then there is zakat to be paid on that. What about, so the third element, the third condition is on unlawful wealth. So let's say somebody, a'udhu billah, but somebody stole some money. Yeah, and that money's been sitting there and it's been growing, right? Then the person thinks, oh, I have to pay zakat on that wealth now. No, there is no zakat on unlawful wealth. So any money that has been earned unlawfully, meaning through theft, through bribery, through interest, through cheating, through robbery, whatever it is, any money or anything that has been attained in the wrong way, there is no zakat on that money. It is not clean. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tayyib. Allah is pure. وَلَا يَقْبَلْ إِلَّا الطَّيِّب. And He does not accept that which is pure. Now, let's move to the next topic. How do we deal, commonly asked question when it comes to zakat on debts, right? So you've got a debt. What do we do with these things? Now, this is a common question that is asked, and we have to look at this from two angles. The creditor and the debtor. We have to look at that. So somebody who is lending the money and somebody who has taken the money. The money is one, but there's two people involved. Never will two people both pay zakat on that money. That's never going to be the case, right? Now, if you are the creditor and you have a debt, there are two conditions or there are two scenarios that you are faced with. Number one, you're faced with the scenario that the debt that you have, there is a very strong chance or possibility or likelihood of you receiving that money back. Scenario number two is there's a strong chance, likelihood that you will not receive that money. Okay, so very simple. Let's look at the first case, inshallah. Then we will have to wrap things up, inshallah, and we will go to pray. MashaAllah, we have Brother Walter Musa with us and Muhammad Afzal, MashaAllah, Barakallahu Feek, Akhi. Alright, so we have two conditions here when it comes to zakat and when it comes to debt. Now, the two types of debts, the first debts are creditors, they expect to be repaid, meaning that the debts made to the parties who are capable of paying zakat. Zakat is obliged on this category of debts every year, as if they were properly under their control. So, the first type of zakat is the zakat where first type of debt, is where you've lent somebody money and you're very confident that that person is going to pay you that money back. So you've agreed a time or a date or whatever it is, and if you're confident and you're sure, number one, the amount of money is clear and the time frame is clear, and you know the money is going to come back to you, then you have to pay zakat on that money as if you possess that money, right? Because it's as if you possess it, but you don't, right? So you have to pay zakat on it. Okay. Good. Now, the second are doubtful or dead debts, which are debts on individuals who are incapable of repayment or are denied by debtors. So you've lent somebody money, and that person now is either refusing to pay you back, or that person is denying the debt, or there is something, whatever it is, but that person is not, you don't feel confident at all that this person is going to pay you that debt back. What do you do in this situation? There are three scenarios. The scholars, they divide the conclusion or the answer into three categories. The first of those is that the creditor must pay zakat for all past years upon repayment of the debt. So, let's say somebody owes you £10,000, and there's not any chance of you getting that money back. The person's done a runner. You can't find them, you can't get in contact with them, so it's £10,000. You have to behave as if that's gone, right? From a zakat perspective. That money is not yours, it's gone. But let's say that money comes back to you. Yeah, that money comes back to you. When that money comes back to you, you have to sit down and calculate how many years that money was away from you, and then you have to pay zakat on that money per year. Right? Don't just times it by 3 or times it by 5. It doesn't work like that, because the 10,000 you're going to have, you're going to pay 2.5% on that on the first year, right? So let's say the debt was away from you for 3 years. So you've got to pay zakat 3 years on that £10,000. Now on the first year, that £10,000, you're going to pay 2.5% from that £10,000. Now the second year comes, you're not going to have £10,000. You're going to have £10,000 minus the 2.5% you paid in the first year. Then that total amount of money you pay 2.5% on. Then you minus that 2.5% from that, and you're given a new sum. And then you work out for the third year what's 2.5% of that, right? And then you work it out. So one of the solutions, and this solution is mentioned by Ibn Abbas and also Ali ibn Abi Talib, that a person pays, once he retrieves the debt, pays it every single year. The second alternative is that the creditor should pay zakat for the last year only upon repayment of the loan. And this is the opinion of Hassan al-Basri and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. It's also the view of Imam Malik when it comes to debts. So effectively what you do, if somebody owed you £10,000 and they've done a runner, so in your head you thought it's gone. When you receive that money, let's say you receive it after 5 years, what you do is you only pay 1 year of zakat on it. You don't pay the full 5 years. You pay just the 1 year, and your payment, your zakat, is accepted. Now, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he comes with an alternative approach, and this is the easier of the three approaches. That the third is that the creditor does not owe any zakat whatsoever on this loan. So the £10,000 has gone. You've managed to retrieve it after 3 years, thinking you're never going to get it back. Imam Abu Hanifa, he says, no. What you do with this particular debt is that you start your year from the day you receive that money. It's almost like you've just got an investment or something, like a new venture. So you take that money and you invest it from that moment. From a year from the time you receive it, you pay 2.5% on that wealth. So those are the three approaches. Those are the three approaches when it comes to debt. Now, inshallah ta'ala, we do have to stop and make our way for prayer, inshallah. So this week the lesson was fairly short. I do apologize for that. Next week, inshallah, we'll start a little bit more promptly so we can start 7 or just a bit before 7, and we'll manage to squeeze in 45 minutes, inshallah. So today, do forgive me. Inshallah, we will continue next week talking about zakat and those who are payable for zakat. We can summarize these chapters and we'll discuss them further next week. Let's stop here and let's go to pray, inshallah. Salatul Maghrib. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of your efforts. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you firm. May Allah accept our prayers and our zakat. And Ramadan is around the corner. May Allah accept all of our fasting and praying as well. I'll see you all next week at the same time, 7 o'clock, inshallah. We'll start 7. We'll see you next week at the same time, same place. Barakallahu feekum. Take care of yourselves. Assalamu alaikum.